Hello, and welcome to this episode of That's Interesting. I'm your host, Frank Hart. This show explores things that I find interesting, and I hope that you find them interesting too. There are two guests on this episode, Dr. Victoria Tumanova, who is the director of the Syracuse University Stuttering Research Lab, and my brother Don Hart of the Hart Speech Foundation is back. In this episode, we will explore the work of Dr. Tumanova. Welcome, Victoria and Don. Before we start, Don, please give us a brief explanation of the work done by the Hart Speech Foundation and how the Hart Speech Foundation became associated with Dr. Tumanova.
Thank you, Frank, and welcome, Doc. We started the Speech Foundation. It's called the Hart Speech Foundation. We started it back in 2011 with the intent to be able to help stutterers and people in the stuttering community to improve their lives, not only through scholarships, but also through supporting research as well. So one of the things that we do is we provide scholarships to people that need intensive speech therapy. And the reason we do that is because insurance doesn't cover stuttering therapy in most cases. And so people that really need the help, that don't have the money, can't get it. And we just try to be there to help them do that. We got involved with Syracuse, first of all, because my daughter went there. So I was perusing the website at one point, saw the research that Dr. Tumanova was doing, and found it fascinating because one of my big items that I look at with stuttering is the sooner we can get people into therapy, the better result we're going to have. And Dr. Tumanova is looking into people that stutter at a young age. And specifically, she's looking at, and she'll explain it better than I, but this is why I got involved, is because she's looking at some of the things that concern me, which is why do some kids stutter, why do some kids not stutter, and more importantly, why do some kids that stutter resolve on their own and others don't? And that's the type of thing she's doing, and that's why we started supporting her program. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there's a more complete discussion of the Hart Speech Foundation in episode 1 of this show, and their website is Hart, H-A-R-T, speech.org. Okay. Dr. Tumanova, your primary research interest is in the onset and development of stuttering in early childhood, and that is what we'd like to talk about today. Okay. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and experience, please?
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here, talk about my work, talk about childhood speech and language development, stuttering, all topics that have been the focus of my work for a long time. I started out in college studying speech development, speech and language development, typical speech and language development. And only in grad school did I focus on speech and language disorders and things that can go wrong, and how can communication be impaired in children and adults. So I have a master's degree in linguistics and in speech language pathology. And then as I was completing my graduate training in speech language pathology, I became interested in stuttering, and I wanted to also do research in stuttering to understand the development of this condition and to contribute to clinical knowledge, assessment, treatment strategies. So I went on to do a doctoral study, and I completed my doctoral training at the University of Iowa, and I completed my master's training in speech language pathology, backing up, at the University of Northern Iowa. So spent 8 years of my life in Iowa. Just went back, and it was great to be back. It was great to be back in Iowa. And then I also did some postdoctoral research work at Vanderbilt University. So I have some amazing mentors that taught me about stuttering, helped me learn about how to conduct research. And at Syracuse University, since 2013, I've been continuing my work, looking at the development of speaking, speech, motor control, factors that can affect it, how stuttering develops in very young children, what factors can contribute to the development of stuttering. And then ultimately now I am also starting to look at treatments and what can be helpful for children who stutter and how to help them control their speech. So that's just some of my background. If you have any follow-up questions, go ahead. Let me know.
we have more questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be interested in understanding the process for learning how to speak and to listen. And how having young grandchildren and watching kids grow up, it's fascinating to watch them learn like that. Could you explain, like maybe from the scientific point of view, what's happening?
Yeah, that is a great question and a very complex one to answer. So I'm going to take it one step at a time.
Okay.
Well, communication is such an amazing gift we got and so important to us. So it only makes sense that we start developing it right in utero, So I guess what helps us develop communication, we have biological factors, social, cognitive, environmental. And as I said, the process begins essentially before birth and then continues through early childhood. And a very interesting and exciting thing about it is that we are competent users of our native language or languages by age 5. So birth to 5 is this time where we develop this amazing skill. And there's a lot of development from birth to 5 that supports, communication, supports speech and language. I guess we start with listening. We learn the language through listening. And listening happens even before birth. A fetus can hear sounds around them, mother's voice, we know specifically. And then, let's say, once the baby is born, right away, they are hearing everything, all of the environmental sounds and, speech sounds. And they start responding soon after birth. Sounds that are very early sounds are more vegetative than not, like there's no intent to communicate yet, but babies will produce sounds. But adults in the baby's life start communicating with intent essentially right away. So they will try to establish eye contact with the infant, and they will respond to the baby's vegetative sounds, such as cooing or whatever sounds they're making, as intentful. And that triggers, or that starts this process of realizing for the infant, if I make sounds, somebody's gonna respond. So that starts the process of communication. And it's important for us as infants when we are developing to have this joint attention focus. So my caregiver is looking and I am looking at the same thing, so that if you have an object and you say that is a bottle, that you establish this link. This is an object and this is the name for the object. So that starts this language development process. So attention and joint attention, so where the baby and the caregiver are both paying attention to the same thing, is very important in the language development process and communication development process. Around 6 months of age, babies will have complex speech sound production, babbling, where you have strings of sounds that are not really meaningful yet, but they're sort of practicing with their speech sounds and making the speech sounds is the way, the babbling is important for that. And then jumping right to 12 months of age, so around 1 year of age, typically children will start producing single words. And they will communicate using these single words. But they already understand more than a single word. So caregivers will say sentences to them, and typically, babies will respond to that, but then by themselves, they will use single word utterances. Now, we have, in terms of linguistic complexity of toddler speech and then preschooler speech, we have this concept of the length of utterances in morphological units. So we know that around 1 year of age, children will produce single words. around 2, they will form 2-word utterances. Around 3, 3-word utterances. Up till about age 5, then we have utterances that are on average 5 morphemes long, and then beyond that, this counting morphemes becomes not, complex enough to capture the language that children that are older than 5 are producing. But all of this process from not speaking at all to speaking in full sentences and being competent user of your language happens between birth and 5.
Okay.
So that is, I guess, the process in a nutshell, the process of language development explained in 2 minutes. So very surface level, but yeah, we'll start with that.
That's fine. Interesting to hear what you say after having watched, the kids and the grandkids, especially the grandkids, because you're not with them all the time, and see how they change when you don't see them for a few weeks. Just, your process seems to be right on, and thank you for that. We'd like to get into stuttering now, and we talk about what we understand about children who stutter. Some of the stuff that Don talked about, do all the kids stutter when they start, or do some and some don't, and some clear, some don't clear, some need help afterwards. So, if you give us some information about that, please.
Absolutely. So childhood stuttering is a neurodevelopmental condition. What it means is that differences in brain structure and function lead to difficulties with the rhythm of speech. So stuttering to the listener is not being able to move from sound to sound or syllable to syllable. And people who stutter, typically this verbal behavior that is evident to the listeners is that they get stuck on sounds or syllables, and they aren't able to maintain the typical rhythm of speech. And we know that now, there's more and more research that allows us to look at the brain function during speech, during communication, and look at young children just to glean more information about the nature of stuttering. But what we know tells us it is a neurodevelopmental condition that is genetic. So for an average of about 60 to 70% of people who stutter, they are able to identify a family member somewhere in the family tree who also stutters. So it is genetic, and there is a lot of research underway looking at the genetics of stuttering. What we know up to now is that it is quite complex, and it's going to be a multifactorial. What the research tells us, it's a multifactorial condition where genetics is not the only contributor. We also have environmental contribution, and it is a condition that, from onset, evolves a lot with the sense of how people who stutter respond to difficulties with speaking, how supportive or not their environment may be. So that contributes to how they end up speaking with more ease or less ease as they grow up. And the work that we do, we're trying to find out what exactly contributes to more difficulties with speaking versus less. And as Don pointed out at the beginning of the interview, stuttering typically surfaces around the time where children start putting 2-3 words together, so using more complex language. So that is around 2.5 to 3 years of age when caregivers will first hear that children stutter. And not all children stutter. We know that approximately 5 to 8% of preschool age children go through a period of stuttering, and about 75% of these preschool age children who start stuttering outgrow it within about 6 months to a year. Typically, that's the time frame for stuttering to go away on its own. But then, unfortunately, if we are speaking to a child who is maybe kindergarten, a 5-year-old, and they are still stuttering, chances that they're just gonna outgrow it become slim. So for those children who are outgrowing stuttering, who are on the path to outgrow stuttering, typically that happens soon after its onset. So it could be around age 3, 3.5. And then if children are still stuttering by the time they enter kindergarten, that's probably going to be chronic stuttering. Chances are that the stuttering is not going to go away. But ultimately, the behavior itself is the break in the rhythm of speech that listeners will pay attention to.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, let's talk about your research now, the goal of your research, the types of experiments. I call them experiments, but I don't have a better word for it, that you run on the stutterers, the children that stutter. Just to give us an idea of how that works and what you're doing.
So I've been doing clinical research, and what it means is that the work that we do in the lab is meant to help us serve children who stutter and their families better, support them, provide education, provide clinical services. So my research studies are designed to understand the development of stuttering in preschool age children. So far I've been focused on working with preschool age children. So typically my research projects we would recruit children between age 3 and age 5. And this age is when there's all of this development of language, development of speech coordination, gross movement, like just fine motor skills, like with fingers and operating a pen and typing and all of these fine movements, gross movements, running, jumping. So all of these skills are developing. Importantly for communication, cognitive abilities of children are just exponentially growing during this time. Social skills are developing. So this is the time where we are undergoing probably unprecedentedly rich development that probably doesn't happen for us as humans after age 5, at that rate ever. So this is an exciting time, and I get to work with kids in this age group. And the studies that I've done typically would look at speaking ability of children, how well they are making their sounds. Are they saying all of their sounds correctly, or are they maybe struggling with some sounds, which is typical for this age. We're looking obviously at their speech rhythm, presence of stuttering, and I always recruit children who do and do not stutter to take part in my studies to understand, what are the differences between the two groups. And then within the group of kids who stutter, we are looking at what factors may make speech easier or less easy for them, and how to use these in design of treatment and assessment, so we are better able to help children and do it as early as possible, because early intervention is important. So I also look at speech motor control in my work. So that is, we know a lot, and we obviously have a lot of understanding about development of big movements like running, jumping, arm movement, leg movement. But speaking is probably our most complex, most fine and skilled movement that everybody acquires for us as humans. And on par with that is finger movement, like if somebody especially plays a musical instrument, let's say a piano player, but then very few people are, but everybody talks. So that's why I say, speaking is our most complex movement that we are producing daily. And obviously there is development to the speaking ability, and that's what I'm looking at. How do children, young children, 3 to 5-year-olds, how do they learn speech movements? How fast that happens, how stable their movements are, and what factors affect them. And one factor that I'm specifically interested in is level of physiological arousal or excitement. If you are excited, and kids get excited all the time, you are happy excited, or you got in trouble excited, so the body's level of arousal goes up. And the body doesn't really know if it's good excitement or bad excitement. It just, the excitement is there. And I'm interested to see how that affects speech coordination and learning of speech movements. And this work is informed by what we know about our growth movements, let's say sports research. So we know that athletes are able to perform their routines and they are very skilled at those. But then in times of stress and in times of added pressure, let's say competition, you're not practicing, you're now competing against a team or against other individuals. That's where people tend to falter in their highly skilled movements. If you take, let's say, a gymnastics routine, all the athletes know their routines, but they tend to make mistakes when they are performing and they are competing in high stress situations. So I'm interested to see how our highly skilled movement speaking, right, how that movement is affected by arousal or excitement, which happens for us as we communicate all the time, speaking to another person, trying to get their attention, trying to maintain their attention, talking about exciting things or responding to somebody, maybe you got in trouble and so excitement is always there for us, and physiological arousal is always there for us when we communicate because it's social in nature. And for people who stutter, and for children who stutter specifically, this is when they tend to have more difficulty maintaining the rhythm of speech. And they tend to get stuck more on sounds or on words when they are excited or upset. And that's per parent report when we talk to parents of kids who stutter. And once kids get older, they can also talk about their own experiences, and typically that's what they would say.
Okay, it's fascinating. Just wondering, how many children have you had in your research, and how long has the research been going on for?
I've been I've been doing research and working with children who stutter in different capacities for, I don't know, over 15 years now. So I have worked with many kids, specifically at Syracuse University, probably at this point for different projects, probably over 100 kids participated and contributed to our work at the Syracuse University Stuttering Research lab. Right now, the most current projects that I have, which is funded by the NIH, we have recruited, I would say, about 50 children have participated so far. And we are recruiting children. We are hoping that families will hear about the project and will participate. And we are recruiting kids who do stutter and kids who do not stutter and have typical speech and language development. So we're recruiting both. And our goal is to assess their speech, language, fluency of speech, and specifically look to examine how children learn new speech movements. So we ask kids to wear special small plastic sensors on their face. Kids will wear safety goggles, like if you were, to, I don't know, do some woodwork or whatnot. So the kid version of the safety goggles they wear on their face. And sensors are attached to the goggles on the temples here. And then they wear sensors on their lips, upper lip, lower lip, and underneath their chin. And the safety goggle setup allows us to control for their head movements when they talk. So if they move the head, we know that the lip movement can be subtracted from the head motion. But we are interested in seeing the coordination of their lips as they speak and as they learn new words, something they haven't said before. So we typically will ask kids, can you repeat this phrase after the computer? Can you do it a bunch of times? And children do it, and then we are seeing how the stability of their movements increases and how their movements become more and more stable the more they repeat the same phrase. And an exciting thing is that it happens pretty fast, and children will, start establishing those very stable trajectories of how the lips are moving for the phrase that they're learning within 10 to 15 repetitions of the phrase.
Okay. Yeah. Now, you're just wondering, what What's left to be done with this work? You know, I'm assuming it's going to keep going for a while. And do you have any future plans?
Yeah, I absolutely have future plans, and I hope to continue this work. So we don't really know a lot about speech movement and speech movement learning in young children. So this work is exciting to me for that reason, that I can contribute to our understanding of how speech motor control develops in children. And this work informs what we can do in the clinic. So specifically for my future projects, what I'm working on right now in parallel to this study is to tap into speech movement learning principles for therapy, for speech therapy for children who stutter. There are some principles that govern our movement learning, as opposed to just learning something in declarative memory, like memorizing, I don't know, words or facts. Movements are learned differently, and they tap into different learning processes. Since speech is a movement, my next project is how do we use these principles of motor learning or movement, learning, and apply it to speech therapy for stuttering.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add that I should have asked but I didn't? Or
I don't know if you have any other questions or follow-up questions. Feel free to ask. I really enjoyed your questions. They were very insightful. I hope I covered everything with enough detail and with enough information. I guess one thing I would like to say is I am grateful to the Hart Speech Foundation for the support of my work. And we absolutely were able to put the money to good use. I want to, give some information about our clinic and our services for children who stutter, and younger and older and adults who stutter. So we are on campus of Syracuse University in the Gaby Clinic. And specifically for young children who stutter, we offer group therapy where kids get to mostly just have fun and enjoy, interactions, with other kids who stutter, and their families have meetings, at the same time, and get to troubleshoot the things that are maybe like what is difficult for them in communication, how can they support their children and their communication development. So we have these preschool age services for children who stutter, and for their families, for their parents, which is very important for young kids. That they are supported by their caregivers. We have services for school-age kids, and we typically, have groups and individual one-on-one therapy. For our school-age kids, we also have summer day camp, which is something that the Hart Speech Foundation supported last year. So we had kids participate, and kids that come from disadvantaged backgrounds. We were able to arrange bus services, bus them to our clinic, and that allowed for more participation. We had a famous basketball player visit us and speak to the children, because he also stutters, so he could talk to kids about his personal experience. So that was very exciting for us and for the program. And we are going to be continuing this work, and also on the research side of it, I'm working on the research study to provide free therapy to children who stutter, and then also see, how we design therapy in the best way possible to optimize speech learning. So that is an exciting development for me, for the lab. And again, thank you for the support and for spreading the message and letting people know about the services that we have and the opportunities that they can participate in to help them speak easier, help their children. So we absolutely can provide more information. And if anyone is interested, they can email me, call the clinic, whatever works.
Okay. Well, thank you for all the information that you're giving us today, and wish you continued success with your programs and your research. So we're now at the end of this episode, and I want to thank my guest, Dr. Victoria Tumanova, the director of the Syracuse University Stuttering Research Lab, and Don Hart of the Hart Speech Foundation. And I want to thank the crew for all of their help, and thank you for watching this episode, and I hope you stay interested. And thank you, Don. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
And you too.